Well, hello again, everybody. Welcome to Friday and a happy Friday. I hope you're all having a happy day. It's the end of the day, yeah, for me already. It's hard to imagine, actually, that we have such a vast time difference. I think it's 9 a.m. or something for you now, and it's 6 p.m. for me. So wonderful, actually, to know that we can do this all over the world now. So welcome to Aquarius Rising Africa, everybody. And yay, it's Leo Friday. So it's an awesome day for celebration because you've launched your long-awaited Confessions of an Illuminati, Vol.10. And that's up. So I'm so excited to hear all about that. But before that, hello, Leo. How are you?
Very well. Of course, it's still the morning hours, so I'm getting up literally because I've been working non-stop these days, and it's being quite tiring, but also very satisfying because I've been able to promote this book and launch it with great results. So I'm glad. I mean, after many months, when you give birth to a book, it's almost like giving birth to a child. It's like they go and live a life of their own after a while, and then they manifest in many different ways whatever you actually had planted in this writing. I've tried to focus, as you know, on Islam, and it's the first time I do that. So I was quite astonished when this morning I also received a 5-star review from a Sufi mystic who said, even for the Sufis, which I was quite critical in the book because of the way that they've been manipulated, and they actually abandoned some of their original concepts, or maybe it has been instrumentally used, let's say. Even Sufism has a dark side. And so I was quite surprised by a 5-star review that actually invited people to read this book, because what is included in it is also important for the times we are living and for the present crisis in the Middle East to be understood a little bit better. But we're also talking about religion, which is now the fastest growing religion in the world. So it's definitely a very important topic.
I agree with you. I definitely agree with you. It's certainly taking over here in South Africa, that's for sure. Very, very much so already. So, but interesting times indeed. But I would love for us to maybe just go through the chapters of your book, so you can just give us like a kind of like a brief overview. So I'm going to start with chapter 1, and I'm just going to read out what it is. The birth of Islam and the secret societies that manipulated it. So in other words, Muhammad and the Vatican, the controversial origins of Islam, a not so peaceful beginning for Islam. From Cairo Lodge of Wisdom to the Age of Enlightenment. So maybe you can touch on those points and just give us little teasers as to what to expect in this book.
Well, as you know, I have started this series many years ago, basing it on my own experiences within the Illuminati and within Freemasonry and the various secret societies, like I said, that we call Illuminati, but of course they form and shape a network of mystery school of sorts, which basically I've always addressed by their Western side of things. I mean, this is the first time that they also reveal the really big connections there are between Freemasonry and their Islamic counterparts, between the Illuminati and their Islamic counterparts, how secret societies have really originated the way we know them today in places like Syria, Egypt, and of course, when we are talking about Islam, we're talking about a religion that started to spread in territories which had a very rich history. I mean, aside from their initial birth in the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century with Muhammad, We have later on, of course, Persia, which used to be ancient, Persia, everything that we have today under the countries of Iran, Iraq. I mean, all those territories that used to be ancient Sumeria and the Mesopotamic and the Mesopotamian culture is definitely a very rich culture over there. So how did a religion that came out seemingly of modest origins out of a merchant spread so fast and have so much success? And arriving at one point in Egypt had been, of course, the place that gave birth almost to the Jewish faith, because Moses brought out the Jewish people from Egypt. And from that moment onwards, they were led to the promised land. And at the same time, we have, of course, Jesus, who himself in his young age was brought to Egypt. So Egypt, of course, is a major feature of this book. And this book, as all my past books, are a mixture of knowledge, which is, of course, from credible and important sources, but also personal experiences, documents which I managed to retrieve, and much more. So it is always, like in all the Confession series, a mix of an essay together with a bit more of a biographical touch, because here there is also a very important biographical touch. I mean, this book, it's coming out this year for a specific reason. I started to write it right at the beginning of October, and immediately I understood after what happened on the 7th of October that this was the right time to bring out this book after years of me wanting to relay all this information, which also comes from my past experience as involved with the family of Prophet Muhammad and with Islam. I even had an Islamic name at that time, Khaled Saifullah Khan, and my first wife gave birth to my only son, which I never saw again, because the Islamic organization, which basically she belonged to, and that was co-founded by her father, is a very powerful Turkish Sunni organization whose founder is living here in America, protected by the Clinton Foundation, called Fethullah Gulen. And my book is dedicated, in fact, to my son, who this year will be 18, Isaac Rumi, and he might never be able to read this book. I hope he will. I never had any contact with him, because I later discovered that his stepfather, his new figure in his life from a very early age, is actually a member of the World Economic Forum of Klaus Schwab, and is basically one of the senior Islamic members of Klaus Schwab's inner circle. So here we are discussing something that touches me also privately and directly, personally, because I always wondered why my mother even was never able to have any contact with my child. But of course, when I discovered that the stepfather is basically working with Klaus Schwab, is no surprise, because I've been openly critic, as you know, always of Davos, of the Great Reset. I also wrote a book about the occult truths of the Great Reset, which we have discussed on the show, Volume 7 of my Confessions. And of course, I wrote about them in Volume 9 and even in Volume 8 regarding the entertainment industry. So I've been very critical about them. And of course, nowadays I see the world and the way it's going towards a direction of chaos and instability. And I want to contribute in a way to bring some peace, because this book is not really taking any sides. It's simply exposing the facts. It's showing you that definitely Christianity might be regarded, and it is a superior culture in a way, because it has definitely manifested countries like United States of America, and most countries that have started as Christian countries are much more stable than their Islamic counterparts. But at the end of the day, this book is not taking sides. It's showing you that there is wrongdoings on all sides, on the Christian side, right, on the Jewish side, on the Islamic side. And the Islamic side is particularly corrupt, unfortunately, and is also very complex for us Westerners to understand. So in my first chapter, I focus on the birth of Islam to introduce this religion, make people understand how this Quran came into existence, and of course the context, the context in which it came into existence. So Muhammad had this very rich first wife, who was an older woman who he probably married for convenience because she was very rich, in a town of merchants, which was also strategically important, but was pagan, had many idols, 360 idols. So it was totally pagan Mecca, and a tribe that initially tolerated, the Quraysh tribe that initially tolerated Muhammad after he received this Quran in a cave outside of Mecca for a number of years. He channeled this information, but we are also left a little bit puzzled about the context, because the context of the cousin of Khadija, the first wife, was actually an Ebionite Christian priest. So there is actually a Christian element that helps the early manifestation of Islam, and it's almost ignored most of the time by Islamic scholars, even if it's reported in the hadiths, which are the teachings outside the Quran, which regards the Prophet and his companions. So it's this material which I bring to light. First of all, I wanted to discuss the urban legend almost of the Vatican having created Islam, and showing that there is certain inconsistencies. Of course, there might be also some truth to the fact that later on the various Islamic factions were played by the Vatican, one against the other. And in fact, in this context, we have also the birth of the Crusades. The Crusades are the first form of Christian holy war, which will never come into existence without an inspiration from the Muslim world. So in a way, the Muslims today are always accusing the Crusaders, but in reality, the Crusades were inspired by them, because Jesus never really wanted any form of holy war. So that already gives you an idea that my book is digging very deep, and especially when it comes to the first chapter, I explain how, aside from this cousin of the wife, Barak ibn Nawal, who somehow inspired the Prophet Muhammad to write and to channel this book, because he was an Ebionite. An Ebionite Christian is a different kind of Christian. He's a Christian that doesn't believe in the divinity of Jesus, just like it happens in Islam. So that can't really be a coincidence. At the same time, he was a monotheist. But we also see that there is some controversy regarding the first early approach of Muhammad to the Meccans, who were pagans. He actually almost wanted to endorse their pre-existing pre-Islamic deities, the moon goddess. In fact, from the moon goddesses of that whole region, in the end comes the moon and the crescent symbol
right.
of Islam. So I explain also that, and I explain that there was this alleged Jesuit priest, Alberto Rivera, that reported an incredible story that was apparently told to him by Cardinal Bea, who referred to the fact that the Vatican created Islam. But like I explained in my book, it's very difficult that the Vatican could create anything in that part of the world, because there was already back then a division with the Oriental churches that were prevalent in that region. The Vatican didn't have really that much influence. And in fact, we know that the Byzantine Empire led to the creation of what we now call the Orthodox Church. So I wanted to make these things clear, because of course people have always been asking me about Islam and its connections with the Vatican and Christianity, and I make them very clear in this book. I explain also how the so-called daughters of Allah, this idol that was excavated in Azor in today's Israel, which basically shows Allah sitting on a throne with the crescent moon in his chest. I mean, basically, we have always a reference to the crescent moon in these pre-Islamic deities. However, the controversial origins of Islam definitely have an element of paganism, just like Catholicism, like Christianity, when it had to, in a way, be endorsed by the Roman Empire, it had to absorb a lot of pre-existing cults. And this, though, has always been seen by the Muslim world as a wrong thing. You know, we have all these saints in especially in the Catholic world, and all this variety of saints, all this the variety of saints has always been criticized by Islamic people, saying that it is a form of paganism, where they were not much better. So, I mean, this book is just focusing at the beginning on the roots of Islam to show that they are very similar in reality to the Christian roots, but at the same time, Christianity had the figure of Jesus, which was a figure of somebody who sacrificed himself completely and who didn't want to wage a holy war like Muhammad, whose companions went around the whole Middle East killing and anybody who will not comply with them and who will not accept their religion. At times they were not killed. At times they were just put in a position that was more difficult for them to stay Christian or Jews, because they were basically not exempt. They were made to pay certain extra taxes. And in the end, for convenience, some people decided to capitulate and become Muslim simply to not pay these taxes. So there was also a way they were forcing, you know. Still to this day, you know, a Muslim can marry a Christian woman, a Jewish woman, and not have any problem. The Jewish, you know, because, but instead, a Christian or a Jew can't marry a Muslim woman. So it's a very, you know, very convenient way, you know, of doing things. But in any case, I also explained the not so peaceful beginning of Islam, meaning what happened after Muhammad channeled this book in solitude on Mount Hira, allegedly from an angel. We have, of course, the spreading of Islam that forces also initially Muhammad to abandon Mecca and go to Medina, which in fact becomes the second most holy city of the Muslims, because initially the Quraysh tribe didn't accept what Muhammad was preaching, was trying to push. When they have 360 idols and you are proposing only one God, you want to send out of business a whole bunch of priests, of temples, of business, I guess, you know, that they was going around this merchant town of Mecca, which was also important, religiously speaking, for all these gods. So we have, though, with the death of Muhammad, unfortunately, the beginning of this never-ending civilian war between Muslims. Islam of peace, as President George W. Bush hypocritically called it after 9/11 on September 17, 2001, is not really an Islam of peace. What happened is that there was an appointed successor, Abu Bakr, who became the first caliph. Then there was, from that caliphate, another 4 caliphs. They are known as the Rashidun caliphs. But the 4th caliph is Ali ibn Abi Talib, which is basically the cousin of the Prophet, who married his daughter Fatimid. And that led to the conflicts that started really after the death of Muhammad. I mean, it was like even within his own family, they started conflicts. I mean, it was like everybody wanted to be the head, the chief, the sole successor of the Prophet. So there was, of course, these caliphs, and after Abu Bakr, Umar, that became the 2nd caliph, also was murdered. So, I mean, this demonstrates it was not such a peaceful beginning amongst their, the family and immediate friends of Muhammad, they started to argue and kill each other, and it actually ended up with various assassinations. And of course, also there was at one point the so-called Battle of the Camel. And in the end, all this led to the creation of the Shiite Muslims, which is the second most important faction of Islam after the Sunni, which are considered the ones who obey to the Sunnah, to the most orthodox and the original. Okay, how did they come together, this Shia? What happened was that the fourth caliph was this flag bearer of Islam, this husband of the daughter of the Prophet, who was visioned by certain people as being equally, if not even more important than Muhammad. This, you can imagine, created quite a problem with, saying that Muhammad is not anymore the sole figure. To this day, the Shia countries are Iran, part of Iraq, and then we have a variety of Shia schism that then created other religions that at times are even detached from the original 5 tenets of Islam, like the Druze or the Alawites in Syria, or, for example, the Ismaili Ashashins Nizari that became also the allies of the Knights Templars against the Sunni war. So this, as you can see, Chantelle, it's a mess from the very beginning. And it's very chaotic. But I tried with my book to be very methodic in exposing, and actually people have seen that and have thanked me, because they say this book has very complex topics, but it's very easy to read. You have laid out all this complexity in a way that people are able to understand.
Yeah.
Now, the actual Shia groups, the Shia religion, that today is so anti-Semitic and so anti-Israel and so anti-Jewish, in reality was created by a Jew. Because the guy who basically supported the idea that Ali had to become the son-in-law of Muhammad, equally important, the fourth caliph of the Rashidun, was a guy that basically was Jewish. He was called Allah ibn Sabah, and Allah ibn Sabah was, of course, not seen very well by the Jewish people because he wasn't really, a good Jew. And we find that even before the Sabbatean Frankists, there is, of course, the Erev Rav. There is always this heretical side of Judaism that came out of Egypt together with Moses, because they were the magicians, the high priest of Egypt, who followed Moses because they saw that he was very powerful. And so they decided to follow him together with the Jewish tribes. But the Rashidun Caliphate basically ended up with the 5th caliph. And after that, the guys who actually established the most powerful caliphate after that were the same people who initially criticized Muhammad, the pagans of the Kurdish tribe. They actually formed their own caliphate. When Islam became so popular, they said, okay, we're going to make our own caliphate. So you see here, there is really a history which, like I said, is complex, but it makes us understand also that, for example, the history of Islam and the very foundations are entrenched with vicious killings, hate, and so when they say Islam, religion of peace, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, wow.
No, I agree.
If we have to judge them by their fruits are not they're quite poisonous here.
Yeah.
So I'm working to make people realize that here it's not about taking sides, it's about exposing the truth. It's about simply expose. Yeah. So that's why in the Muslim world, and we said it before we started the show, they are actually viewing this book with interest, because it's relying on sources which are credible and are actually accepted by them. So it's like putting in their face their own truths. And at the same time, I was lucky enough to have this experience within the Muslim world, which started in 2003 and which I will be talking about later on, which brought me in contact with the Cairo Lodge, which I also introduced in the first chapter, which is basically born, as we know it, within the Fatimid dynasty. So as Islam was spreading, and the two factions also were spreading, the Shia faction became the more secretive one, the one that will adopt the more secretive aspects that will become, of course, will give birth to the secret societies as we know them today, because they had to keep their own belief secret in order to not get punished by the majority, Sunni. And at the same time, within the Shia world, the Shiite world, we also see the birth of the Sufis. And who are the Sufis? The Sufis in reality are the ones who have, they start creating these secret societies, which are basically embracing parts of Islam, but merging them with pre-existing beliefs. And here we have in the Middle East, in those areas, Manichaeans, Zoroastrians, Gnostics, and so on, that were still prevalent in certain intellectual circles, and they couldn't just be wiped off the map by the new established religion. When the Quran was brought from the Arabian Peninsula to Persia, which is, I mean, a place of great history, just like Egypt, you know, the first thing these people did was like, you know, the intellectuals, the people in charge of the knowledge, who knew how to read and had all those archives, and they wanted to read this Quran and analyze and say, what is this Quran all about? But they were not particularly impressed, a lot of them. And others said, okay, we're going to have to accept it, because otherwise they're going to cut our throats. So, you know, we're going to have to accept it, but we going to maybe establish a secret society that preserves our prior knowledge together with this new Islamic knowledge. So it's wrong to say that the Sufis are born only with an Islamic inspiration, because in reality they were also inspired by pre-existing beliefs. And let's not forget that it was in the Middle East and in places like Baghdad or Cairo that the knowledge of the Hermetica, the knowledge of the great Greek philosophers was preserved when Europe was in the Dark Ages, basically. So we have in my book, in the first chapter, I also discuss this establishment of the Cairo Lodge, which was preserving the wisdom of these pre-existing groups and pre-existing, I mean, Cairo had, of course, all the knowledge also from the schools of Memphis, of Alexandria. I mean, here we're talking about knowledge that, of course, was very important and couldn't be just so. This knowledge merged with a Shia faction, which was the Fatimid dynasty, which claimed to be descendants of Fatima and Ali. And the Fatimid dynasty conquered the whole of the Middle East, south of Italy, Sicily, that was established as an emirate. So I talk from personal experience, so not only because of my own personal experience with Islam, but also because of the experience of my ancestors. My surname Zagami is Zaham. I'm, I have a Persian Iranian blood, aside from other variety of blood that they have as an aristocrat. But it's true, many aristocrats in Italy have Iranian Persian blood. And at the same time, the place where my family comes from is this little island in front of Sicily called Ali Kur, the rock of Ali, because they were Shia. so right. The actual foundations, as I explain in my book, of the mafia are to be found within the Islamic period that in which Sicily was Islamic. And this, of course, is shocking for a lot of people, but it was based on the tax for the non-Muslims. It's like when the mafia goes to your shop and says you have to pay the tax. Now, this is the classic mafia modality that even the Sicilian mob brought here to America. And you have all the Little Italy, they will go around and say, this restaurant, well, you have to pay the protection, you have to pay, if you want to stay alive and you have your shop in the main street, you will have to pay. You probably still have to pay to this day in certain parts of, I'm not saying maybe America, I hope not, but in Italy, you still have to pay. So where does this tax come from? And it comes actually from this Islamic tradition that was established back then, because so the mafia includes the words mafi, which means exempted as in Islamic law, and jizya, which is the yearly tax imposed on non-Muslims residing in Muslim land. This is a fact. It's a fact. So this is the origins of the fiercest and most brutal group of people which they are in the world, the mafia, the original mafia. That's what they call it, the mafia. So I'm half Sicilian. I think I know about what I'm talking about here. No, so of course the more modern mafia became then connected with Freemasonry, because Freemasonry is also born in the Middle East, and it's born in the Middle East, and that's why their allegory is based on the King Solomon's temple, and basically the Knights Templars ended up with their base on Temple Mount, which was basically the place that today still is at the center of all the controversies of the Middle East. Because when we are talking about Hamas and Gaza, we are talking about another most important base of the Knights Templar. But we're also talking about Hamas, which has the Al-Aqsa Brigades, claims they are the Al-Aqsa Flood, the Al-Aqsa Force. And Al-Aqsa is basically there in Temple Mount with the Dome of the Rock. So, and it was actually strategically built, that place, as strategically. Why? Because Muhammad died before Jerusalem was conquered by one of his friends. But still, if you go on the Quran, you will find Muhammad flying on a winged creature in the middle of the night, ended up on Temple Mount there, and then rises to heaven, meets all the prophets, they all greet him, they all bow down to him, basically, and then that is the place for the Dome of the Rock. The guy was dead. So it is obviously a later insertion, an insertion that is made out of convenience, so they will have this stone on the side of the Jewish people forever, and still to this day claiming, well, that is the place, it's the third most holy place. You have Mecca, you have Medina, and you have Jerusalem for the Muslim. But like I said, it is about conveniently using religion for geopolitical and strategies that have nothing to do with the faith. No? So in the first chapter, I explain how the Cairo Lodge of Wisdom was established by this Fatimid dynasty in Cairo on pre-existing mystery schools and, of course, traditions that and secret societies that have always been there in Egypt from the times of ancient Egypt. And eventually they gave birth to what is known as the House of Knowledge. And the House of Knowledge is basically became these two competing universities. And then the House of Knowledge after the Fatimid dynasty no longer exists, but it gave birth to the base of what is now today the Al-Azhar University, which is also it's also the base for Obama's infamous speech, but also for one of the most powerful. We have also the mosque of Al-Azhar, and of course the Imam, which is judged as one of the most, if not the most important authority within the Sunni world. Because after the Fatimid dynasty, Egypt capitulated as a Shia country and became Sunni. You see, why I'm saying this is because within the context of the Middle East, the Fatimid dynasty, during its period of expansion, arrived, imagine, from the Arabian Peninsula, all North Africa, Sicily and south of Italy, almost getting to the Vatican. They were very powerful. So they were getting more and more powerful. And at the same time, though, there was an enemy that was advancing and that was starting to become, more and more powerful. And those were the Seljuk Turks, which eventually, with Saladin, waged war also against the Crusaders. But the Crusaders that arrived there in the Middle East and their knighthoods, especially the Knights Templars, found it convenient to play one side of Islam against the other in all this, no? So you will have basically the Knights Templars being inspired, even as an order, by the Assassins, the Order of Assassins, which was founded in the Ismaili Nizari environment, and the Ismaili Nizari and the guy who founded the Sanisabah was himself initiated in the Cairo Lodge. So we always go back to the Cairo Lodge, even if after the Nizari Assassins became very powerful between Syria, Iraq, and those areas. They actually, the guy who originated the whole thing came from Cairo. So this Lodge of Cairo that Nesta Webster used to call the terrible Lodge of Cairo, because a lot of things came out of this lodge. A lot of religions came out of this lodge. A lot of schismatic groups that then spread left, right, and center came out of this lodge. So I'm trying to explain to the reader of this book that the origins of the secret societies are basically we can say, in the areas that we now see: Iraq, Syria, Iran. These are the modern countries with those names, of course, but those were the areas that inspired even the foundation of the Knights Templars. The Knights Templars themselves employed the Shia Muslims assassins to kill the Sunni Seljuks that were expanding more and more and becoming a fierce force that could threaten even Rome. The Shia Muslims kind of stayed on their fortresses without really much expansion at one point, because of all the internal squabbles they had within the Fatimid. The Fatimid didn't really last. It lasted only a couple of centuries. So they were not deemed as a threat. But the Seljuk Turks became a threat, because let's not forget that their successors was then the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire arrived almost, we are talking about Europe, we are talking about Vienna being, we are talking about the possibility that the history of humanity will have been forever changed if these Muslims conquered Europe. And it was, thank God, to my ancestors in the knighthoods of the Hospitaliers, in the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, and the Knights Templars, Teutonic Knights, that stopped this impending invasion, that we have some civilization as we know it today. Because, yes, it's true that they had an Islamic golden age, but what was that golden age based on? It was based on invading, looting, raping, and taking all the knowledge of each city and bring it back to their own home, but never really elaborating anything original.
Yeah.
So this is, of course, important to, in my book, to explain all this. And of course, at that point, we arrive to chapter 2, from chapter 1, because I think we went quite a lot to chapter 1, probably almost the whole show in chapter 1 only. But when you arrive to chapter 2, you understand that all this knowledge from the Mesopotamian towns of Haran in particular, which was the chief seat of the Illuminati, and all the knowledge that basically was captured by the Muslims, became the basis for a lot of their secret societies. And that's why they have been extremely influential. And so in my book, I explain also the another important faith that was born within the Cairo Lodge, because Hassan Sabah was a Nizari and basic Ismaili who created these assassins. But then we had also another group that was created out of the Cairo Lodge, and that the group was the Druzes, the Druze faith, which counts today something like 1 million people around the world, but it's very influential. And we have several Shia Ismaili sects, and the world 15 million Nizaris and 1 or 2 million Mustalis that regard at one point one of the rulers of the Fatimid Empire as the ultimate emanation of God. Wow. And this guy was actually the head of the Cairo Lodge, and he was no saint, and he was no emanation of God. He was actually a big crook, you know. So Al-Hakim, and he was basically, they created this Dar al-Alim, which is the House of Knowledge, which was officially created in the year 1005. And this member, it was the sixth, one of the caliphs of the, I think the sixth Fatimid caliph. His name was Hakim bi Amra Allah, who had basically at one point after the first caliphs before him, the first 5 caliphs, have been very tolerant with the Jewish faith, very tolerant with the Christians. Tolerance was really the way in which the most established Islamic empires have managed to be stable, because the Ottoman Empire lasted 8 centuries because they were capable of simply saying, okay, you're not Muslim, but if you are a people, you are mentioned in the Quran, like the Christians or the Jews, you are okay. You might have to pay tax. You might not have you might not reach the position of powers of the Muslims within society, but you will not be persecuted. Instead, with the arrival of this asshole of Al-Hakim bin Amra Allah, who thought himself was, first of all, he, inside the lodge, he made it clear that it was all about science and reason, and that religion was basically for the idiots who were outside. So this already, but then he himself, for the people who were outside, he imposed the strictest form of Sharia in Cairo. It was just a nightmare. You couldn't have a party, anything. It was very strict. And so at one point, this guy was obviously killed by somebody, and his body made to disappear, because then all the people instead who were worship him as a kind of god, this guy simply disappeared one night. And nobody knows where his body ended up, but probably ended up in a very bad place, because he was, like I said, but to this day, Al-Hakim is worshipped as a god by the Druze, by all these factions that instead saw in him a guy who was kind of bringing the right interpretation for them of what they saw was Islam, which became, though, very confused interpretation, because then, each one went their own way. And so it creates more and more chaos, more schism between various groups. However, in my book, I also explain how this crisis eventually mined the most important empire the Shia ever had. That's why the Shia nowadays are restricted to Iran, to Iraq. The Ismailis, okay, you can find them even in Pakistan, you can find them in India, you can find them, but they are, like I said, a minority faction because they were not capable of staying united. The Sunni instead, with the Saladin, advanced and became, the prevailing faction. I mean, they put the Shia back in their place, let's say.
Right.
So that's what happens. And of course, in my book, I explain how the lodge in Cairo had 9 degrees, what kind of initiations, also how the Assassins created by Hassan Isabah, who inspired the Knights Templar, had their own degrees, 7 degrees, with initiations that made the basis for contemporary jihadism, because jihadism in the idea of a Muslim can be a bigger or a lesser jihad, and it can be either a jihad that is fought for your own good against your own demons within yourself, or it becomes an external war, no? And the actual novelty, let's say, that was brought together by these first terrorists of all time, because they were really terrorists, was that they were no longer like the early Muslims who were going around conquering the land, but fighting, in a traditional way. No, the jihadist was the guy who will come in the middle of the night and slit your throat from behind with no respect, or will get... today we have the jihadists exploding themselves and killing innocent people. That kind of thing was never really condoned by the first Muslims, because it's not found anywhere in the original.
Right.
But it came into existence because the Assassins became basically the killers that were employed by the Vatican Knights Templar. So the Vatican definitely has a say in the way that things got more and more fundamentally wrong, because they encouraged those people to go and kill the Sunni Seljuk leaders.
Right.
And Saladin himself had 2 attempts of assassination against him. But the Knights Templars will present themselves with the other knighthoods as being very proper. Okay, we fight you with the sword. Let's go and fight this battle. But then, if they didn't like one guy, the Templar would go secretly to their Shia Nizari allies and say, can you please slit their throat tomorrow in the middle of the day? He's in this place. Can you go there and kill him? We can't do it, because it will not be, they will say the Vatican is a bunch of crooks, which is a bunch of crooks. So the employ is, and all this, then bring it forward it a few hundred years, and we arrive to 9/11. And we arrive to the indiscriminate use that was made from 1928, the establishment of the Muslim Brotherhood, to the Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hamas, and all these, the Houthis, and all these groups that basically are mercenaries of the New World Order and mercenaries of the heirs of the Knights Templars, which are the modern Freemasons.
Right.
So that's it. We are all played here. And my book is showing finally how you can understand all these secret societies, schools of Islam, everything, and finally have a less naive view as a Westerner. Because this book is shocking also the Islamic world, because my late friend, who was the Grand Master of the Sufi Geray Helveti, a very important, famous Turkish group, but he was actually living in Italy, Gabriele Mandelkhan, he died in 2010. before he died, he gave me this image, which I also put here on the cover, but you can find also in the book. And it is an image that is going to shock the Muslim world, and is already shocking the Muslim world, because this is Muhammad on the cross with a turban, found in a Knights Templar church. So what they were worshipping, these Templars? Muhammad, and on a cross. We know that it's heretical to represent Muhammad. We know that it's even more heretical to put Muhammad on a cross. But you will find the secrets of this alliance between the Illuminati of the East and the West, and why they worshipped Muhammad on a cross, in my book. So the way that I'm bringing this information is not only through my words, but also through the hard evidence.
Right.
And that is kind of shocking. That's why my book is becoming a phenomenon also in the Muslim world. And up until now, there has not been one single Muslim that has been able to debunk anything on this book.
Wow.
So it's going to be a game changer on the long run, because it's going to make people understand on all sides, we are in the wrong. We are in the wrong, the ones that thought that 9/11 was, whoa, the Muslims attacking the West. They are in the wrong, the people who think that, oh, 9/11 is an inside job. It was the skull and bones with the... Yeah, it was also the skull and bones, which, by the way, is a symbol for the Knights Templars. It was also the Sabbatean Frankists. There was some kind of involvement, and that's why you had some idiotic dancing Jews. But the real truth is that this is an inside-out job, and that basically couldn't have been done without that ancient alliance and those mercenaries in the Muslim world that did the same thing they were doing at the time of the Knights Templars, destabilizing and attacking innocent people and killing them so they could get a reaction. And the reaction then served the purpose of the military-industrial complex that brought the war to Afghanistan, to Iraq. And which results we got out of these wars? Nothing, apart from enriching the military-industrial complex and the big pharma. That's it. Because the military-industrial complex sold a lot of weapons. The kids that went and fought this war got screwed up, and when they come back, they have to use all the medicines that are given by the big pharma. And so here, it's a win-win situation for these people, not for us. And the people in the Middle East got further destabilized. And the intention is to spread further this religion, because this religion works very well with the Illuminati. And they're capable of manipulating this religion better than other religions. Because today, in the year 2024, this is the only religion that actually makes it possible to go and kill somebody and then end up your life with 72 virgins and all that bullshit. That thing is basically something that was devised by people like the Assassins. In fact, in their initiation, hashish, a lot of smoking hashish. The guy smoked this, all this hashish. He will get completely stoned. At that point, he will be blindfolded, brought into a temple. In the temple, there will be a wonderful garden full of nice ladies. He will take off the blindfold and say, this is paradise. If you want to come back to paradise, you have to kill what we say you have to kill, and you have to give your life for the order. And that's it. That's what happened with the Mohammed Atta and those assholes who worked for George Bush and his friends in Saudi Arabia when they brought down the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, all that other, and the whole charade. So it's about finally becoming aware of these things. So then it's not us pointing the fingers, Israel is evil, these other guys are evil. They are all evil. The people in Gaza who are crying now, 800 years ago, were killing the people who were living there with the Knights Templars in peace, the Jews and the Christians, and Saladin slaughtered every single one outside of the fortress of Gaza. What comes around goes around. Remember that. Karma works. And so you cannot say, the innocent children. Yes, and 800 years ago, it's about
history repeating itself over and over, right?
Yes, but it's like a reverse, no? It was the Muslims killing the people, like now the Jews are killing, whatever. But I mean, if you disseminate hate, you're gonna get hate. So my book is disseminating peace. Is about making the people realize that the Christians were corrupt because they should have never done what the Vatican has done with the Knights Templars in those territories. The Jews are corrupt because the Sabbateans, who with the Nathan of Gaza made Gaza the holy city, they cursed that place forever. They had a mega orgy with Shabbatai Zevi to welcome him in the city, and this big ritual cursed the place forever. Further, it was already cursed for what happened before, right? Cursed even more. And the Sabbateans are, of course, the heretics of the Jewish world, the ones that are behind the labor Zionists that now are destabilizing Israel, so they could simply kick out Netanyahu. I mean, they made all this big thing. They let Hamas inside the kibbutz simply so now, today, they can say, Netanyahu, you have to resign. So, I mean, it's like, it's incredible that the people don't have the possibility of understanding all this because, of course, they are always made to focus on the small picture, not the big picture. And then you have those idiots in the universities with their encampments. Those people are complete fools. Those millennials, those young students should study this book and finally understand that what they're doing doesn't make any sense. They are more idiotic than the ones that fought against the war in Vietnam. They're a bunch of fools. Because if you condemn Israel, then you have to come to the realization that Israel is made out of people that were persecuted for hundreds of years all over Europe. And at one point, because of the Sabbateans, Frankists like the Rothschild, Adolf Crémieux, and all the Alliance Israélite Universelle and everything that came before Zionism, and then the establishment of Zionism, which, by the way, was initially a nationalistic thing. But after a couple of years, it was infiltrated and made into a communist, labor Zionist hell. And so the establishment of this state was made because we persecuted these people all over Europe. And at one point, we forced them into going to Israel, where there were, of course, other people there already. But what the heck, guys? What are you going to send them? Are we going to send them on the moon? They went to Israel. Good, okay. They established themselves, and now we want to say from the river to the sea, because you say Palestine has to be free of what free? They were under the Ottoman Empire. They were under the Brits after that. There was no freedom. And the destabilization of the Ottoman Empire that created this crisis 100 years ago, well, that is a creation of Great Britain and France and their Illuminati, who wanted to destabilize for 200 or 300 years this Ottoman Empire, and in the end they managed. In the end, the Ottoman Empire ceased to exist, and today what do we have? Today we have Turkey with Recep Erdogan, who is basically inciting a holy war against Israel and protecting Hamas. I mean, the problem here is like we need really to understand where all this hate is coming from on all sides. So then we can finally maybe elaborate a better future, and that is the intention of my book.
Well, I love your book, and I'm kind of like almost mesmerized by what you're telling me tonight. It's like so much of the stuff I don't know, some of it I'm aware of, but you really have just filled in so many blanks for me here tonight anyway. But what I'm going to say then is we will leave it at that unless there's something you want to actually end off with. And then the next time we'll do from chapter 4 to 7. But there was just actually one more thing I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, we have chapter 3, of course, and we have Crowley, Aleister Crowley, because
yes, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because people don't really know that Aleister Crowley was fascinated and actually inspired by Islam during the whole course of his life. And this book finally brings you actually the information to realize that and to understand how the Ordo Templi Orientis, which is now this sect which has infiltrated Freemasonry, which is considered one of the most important sects of the Illuminati network, in reality is fueled with Islamic lore and Islamic teachings. Because in my book, I actually, I was an 8th degree of the OTO, so I actually had a direct experience. I explain how Crowley went to Cairo, the Lodge of Cairo. He got initiated into a secret society that basically was a secret society of a Sufi secret society called Aisawa. And the anagram of this Aisawa is basically Aivas, the entity that he claimed was transmitting the knowledge of Horus to him and the Book of the Law. Crowley himself admitted that he wanted to desperately go to Mecca, but to go to Mecca, you have to be a Muslim. Now, there had been somebody in the Theosophical Society before him who actually managed to pass as a Muslim and go to Mecca, but Crowley, with his ways and his looks, was a little bit too white and a little bit too British to look like an Arab in any way, shape, or form. And so he would have probably been killed as soon as he arrives in Mecca. So he didn't manage to get to Mecca. But in his order, because he was initiated into the OTO by Theodore Royce, then Theodore Royce asked him to rewrite the rituals of this order, especially after Crowley visited America. And the Freemasons of America have said that the rituals of the OTO were too close to Freemasonry. So he had to rewrite the rituals. So he changed the central figures of the Masonic allegory, which is basically Hiram Abif, for example, with a very important figure within the Sufi world, which is Mansur al-Alaj. And I said before, I talked before about the Baphomet on the cross being basically Muhammad on the cross is Baphomet. It's this, everybody talks about Baphomet. And Crowley himself claimed to be Baphomet. So the actual connection with the OTO is found in the rituals of the OTO. When I was initiated in the OTO, Chantelle, I was initiated in London. I think it was end of the 90s. I was near the headquarters of MI5 there in Vauxhall, and I actually published the map of where I was initiated in Volume 1 of my Confessions. But anyway, when I was initiated, I was blindfolded like you do in Freemasonry, and you never know what happens when they take the blindfold. So it's always an adventure. It's always shocking, because there has to be the shocking factor. There has to be this factor, the shocking factor, in order to change something within yourself. That is what they say. That's what they claim. They claim to be opening chakras or being opening yourself to something when they take this blindfold off. And it happens in Freemasonry, of course, when you are initiated in the entered apprentice degree, but it happens also in the degrees that follow that until the Master Mason one, of course. But when I was taken by blindfold, I still remember going up these stairs. I was blindfolded. They brought me up these stairs. You can see a little bit below. I could see a little bit the stairs below. And I was going up. I go up the stairs. And then they opened the door. And I thought, okay, I had studied Crowley. I knew his fascination for Egypt, for ancient Egypt and all the rest. So I imagined blindfold taken off, I don't know, images of ancient Egypt, Isis, Osiris, Horus, whatever. I imagine something like that. Instead, no, it was completely different. I was shocked. They took the blindfold from me, and I find a guy dressed up as Saladin with a white turban in an Arabic tent. And I was like, okay. And then, the guys that they invite you during the initiation, you have to turn around and suddenly you will see all the other people. And they were dressed up, of course, like they usually dress up in the OTO with this black thing. But the actual encounter with Saladin in the Minerval degree, I tell you, it was pretty shocking in a way. Pretty shocking. Because I kind of I said, so there is a Muslim connection here. And later on, this Muslim connection assumes an even more elaborate facade when in the third degree, which is basically like the Master Mason degree in Freemasonry, instead of having in the Master Mason degree, you have the figure of Hiram Abif, which is the guy who helped constructing the Solomon's Temple. In the Master Constructor, and he gets killed, and then he's resurrected, and you are basically reenacting his death and bringing him back to life. Instead, in the OTO, we were all brought around this dead body of a Muslim, which, of course, it wasn't really dead. He was enacting. So it wasn't really like they had killed somebody. Just so they didn't kill anybody. But there was somebody pretending to be dead on the floor, who was, of course, visibly a Muslim. And I was like, what the heck is this? And then the ritual recites that basically we are here to commemorate the death of Mansur al-Alaj. And so you are thinking, well, Mansur al-Alaj is not Saladin, it's somebody else. And in fact, Mansur al-Alaj is a character which I explain in my book, was a very controversial Sufi, probably working for the Cairo Lodge, who tried to infiltrate Baghdad, because you see, Cairo had created the Cairo Lodge had created this house of knowledge. Baghdad had created the house of wisdom. They wanted to the secret society behind the house of wisdom was the Brethren of Sincerity, which was coming from Haran. So there was another branch of the Illuminati that wanted to compete with the ones in Cairo. But anyway, Mansur al-Alaj was an incredible individual who went around one morning around Baghdad saying, I am the truth and all the truth is in my turban. Basically, I am God. This is what he was saying. And you can't say that in the Muslim world without having some problems, of course. He gathered a lot of followers, but his whole thing was a little bit like Osho Rajneesh. There were sex things, people dancing around behind him. So when he arrived in pilgrimage in Mecca, he was like a whole circus, It was like Osho, of course.
Yeah, Osho, yeah.
You remember when they used to bring Osho on top with the thing, and he's sitting down on top of this thing, and they used to bring him around the ashram and all this bullshit. Well, the same thing, and he was wearing the same kind of dresses that Osho wore because he was influenced by Indian gurus. So he was going around the Muslim world like an Indian guru, portraying him. At one point, of course, the Caliph had him arrested, and eventually they would cut his head off. But the wife of the Caliph said that he was very holy, so the head had to be kept and worshipped within the Sufis. And that is the secret head that they talk about during the Templar tribute, when the Knights Templar were persecuted and arrested because, of course, Philip the Fair and the Pope claimed they were heretic, but of course it was also about money because the Templars had established also the first banking system. But having said that, they accused them of worshipping an idol, which was the Baphomet on the cross, and a mysterious head. which was the head of Mansar al-Alaj, which, by the way, you can go and visit his tomb today, and it's still in Baghdad, and it's still kept all nicely, and because he was an heretic, but he was also deemed as having very many powers. So he was feared by even his enemy. This Mansur al-Alaj was born in 858 and died in 922. So there is basically two, and he was a Sunni, even if a lot of the things he was doing were not very Sunni. And that's why I'm saying that he allegedly was probably an agent of Cairo's lodge, because he wasn't very Sunni in the way he was doing things. And a lot of the things that he was promoting were typical of the Cairo lodge, which, by the way, as you can see, has produced a lot of stuff. Has produced Hassani Sabah and the Order of the Assassins, has produced the Druze, has produced Mansur al-Alaj, possibly what he did. I mean, in the degrees of the OTO, we have two figures here. We have Mansur al-Alaj and we have Saladin. And when I arrived into this ritual, and they said, we are here to commemorate the death of Mansur al-Alaj, who was an initiate of our holy order and our come for the full comprehension of his nature, I was like, who the heck is this guy? No? And so you see how heavily influenced by Islam is Crowley's OTO and the Illuminati.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it makes it very important, I think, for our viewers to get this book, because it was actually Crowley who said, who in the initiation, I mean, he wrote the initiation, so it must have been Crowley who wrote. So that's why I say Crowley said, but in reality, it is during the initiation. Basically, you have this voice says, "I am the truth, and in my turban is wrapped nothing but God." And the ignorant and unworthy populace began to accuse him of blasphemy, so that a council of 12 elders was convened to consider his case. Abrades was acquitted by the votes of 9 of these men, 3 only being by execution, but even the majority. And in reality, when he was convicted and executed, he went to the execution saying, I am the truth. He was defiant all the way until they chop his head, this guy. So, and today, in the Muslim world, they have actually reevaluated Mansur al-Alaj. They kind of reevaluated him. They say that he was some kind of mystic that had, a connection with God and all that. But in reality, it's part of the dark side of Sufism. That's how it was. I mean, that's how it is. And in the Illuminati, they revered very much the fact that he claimed he was God, because the Illuminati themselves, as I told you in my past books, have always this idea, this Gnostic idea that eventually brings them to say we are gods.
Right.
And then they like that. They like the fact, So in my book, of course, is much more detailed, and people can read it. I explain how in the various degrees there is also they show like an image of the Egyptian desert. So you have basically a recreation of the Middle East without what we find instead in the prior rituals of the OTO, which were inspired by the Memphis and Mizraim, which of course had more Egyptian elements to it. There was this heavy insertion of Islamic, but also Aleister Crowley was a man of his time. He was working for the British intelligence. The British intelligence, as we will explain maybe in the next episode when we will touch on the other chapters, established itself through Freemasonry in the Middle East and connected with all the pre-existing secret societies. So I think that people understand that today, if we have this chaos in the Middle East, is also because it's convenient. It's convenient to keep countries, especially countries in Africa, for example, that embrace Islam, in a third world condition. And and this religion somehow helps them, keeping them in the third world condition, because this religion is the only way you can stop them from evolving.
Exactly.
It's not any longer the Islam of the golden age that was embracing all the knowledge they were going, through, and kind of putting it together for their houses of knowledge or wisdom.
Right.
It's about an Islam that tells you, no, you have to read only the Quran. All the other books you can burn. And you have to follow only the Sharia, and all the rest. And modernism in the Western world is evil, is the devil, is Satan, and all that bullshit.
Right. Exactly.
So, in the end, we can say, Chantelle, that while the Illuminati and Freemasons brought the Industrial Revolution, brought us a modern approach to our society, actually maybe a modern approach that has even, initially was actually bringing us some positive elements, but in the end ended up destroying even the basis of our society, which is a family, because they went one step further when all this woke bullshit was created, and everything that preceded it, meaning that nowadays it's not anymore the traditional family. It's a woman, man, whatever, and it's all this thing. While in the West, the Illuminati pushed so they could destroy Christianity, basically, because that's what they did, to substitute it with some kind of progressive form of Christianity, like the one we have today with Pope Francis, or we have in the Anglican Church, which lets women marry with women and all that kind of BS. So we have basically destroyed our own Christian tradition. In the Middle East, the Freemasons and the Illuminati didn't really push a modern approach. They did rather the contrary. They brought them back to the Middle Ages.
Right.
So they could be kept in that continuous state of third world state, because that's what they really want in the end. They simply want the third world to stay the third world, and they keep on making money and
exactly living. Because it serves them. It serves them to have it like that. Oh my goodness. Wow. What an interesting conversation.
And of course, somebody has pointed out here in the chat how the Muslim Arabs also who became Knights Templars. There is a whole chapter in my book in which I explain how there was also alleged initiations that were given to Arabs and alleged initiations that were given to the Templars into the Arab world. So, I mean, we have also that thing that definitely it's wrote about in my book. So wow. I hope that with this new book we can finally also lift the veil of many secrets, and also our own naivety here in the West, because we could be naive in regards to Islam until a few decades ago. But nowadays, when we have 6 million Muslims in America, millions of Muslims arriving every day in Europe, we have basically not millions that arrive every day, but millions that have arrived through the last few decades in Europe, creating problems, of course, destabilizing whole cities that are now, for example, ghettos in Sweden that are employing the Sharia law, that are forcing the Sharia law onto their cities. I mean, we need to know something. We need to know the secrets of Islam, because now Islam is part of our society.
Exactly.
It's like you said in South Africa. No, it's expanding as a religion in South Africa. It's expanding. It's expanding as a religion in Europe. Is expanding in our own universities that have even become, like I explain also in my book, basically training grounds and recruitment for terrorists. So if we continue to be naive and think, oh, well, I don't really want to understand this stuff because I'm not interested in the 5 tenets of Islam or how many times they pray or whatever they do. Who cares? No, that's wrong. Because thanks to our ignorance, they are capable to take over the whole country they establish themselves in. And then you end up with Barack Hussein Obama president, a crypto Muslim in disguise, who is also, like Trump said, the father of ISIS. So, I mean, I think that this book doesn't want to address also any hate towards the Muslims. It simply says that the Muslims, just like the Christians and the Jews, have always been played by organized religion, and that in the end, organized religion is to blame. And the heart of a lot of Muslims, when it's pure and it's real devotion to God, they are very sweet people, very honest, very genuine people. But because almost all the time they are connected to a sect, to a group, to a religious leader of sorts, that then becomes it becomes twisted, and it becomes something that has nothing to do with your relationship with God. It becomes another thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's God with a small g.
So thank you for having me on today, and thank you for letting me explain all this. And next month we will, of course, get into the other chapters of the book. Today also, I mean, there is some events that have happened that I might just briefly comment as we are about to close down the show, but these are connected somehow to my book. We have Iran's Khamenei, who is the Iranian supreme leader, who has received Assad, for example, from Syria. And this is very important because Assad, and this we will be talking in the next episode, in 1 month, when we do our Friday together, we will be talking about the Alawites in Syria, and how this small sect that originally comes from Shia Islam has become one of the most influential, and of course with the Assad's dynasty, because his father.
Right.
And then, of course, we have the Houthi rebels that are claiming now a missile attack on U.S. nuclear powered on a U.S. nuclear power carrier. So that is pretty serious stuff. But the DoD, the Department of Defense, said it's false info. So might on it. Then we have also another thing that is happening in the Muslim world of importance, and it is basically the possible death of the Saudi king, which will mean that Mohammed bin Salman, who is already, as you know, very important figure in the Wahhabi world, and we will be talking about the Wahhabi, of course, next month, is going to become the head of the state. And this is a very important thing because apparently the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman wants to change some of the rules that are prevented they are prevented until now the king to center too much power by, usually in their tradition, the king then appoints the prince, and then the prince becomes king. But then when he becomes king, usually appoints somebody else from another branch of the Saudi establishment, and they're trying to center more and more power. I mean, it seems like this Mohammed bin Salman is becoming now the most powerful man within Islam, and his vision also the future connected to artificial intelligence, to the establishment of a futuristic city, to the establishment of robocops in the streets of the Emirates. This guy is pretty much a nightmare, let me tell you. So it is definitely another thing that I wanted to outline today. And also another thing, and this really demonstrates the great failure of America with Joe Biden abandoning Afghanistan is the recent improvement of the Russian-Taliban relations. I mean, we are talking about the very basis which made the CIA finance for years what would become later Al Qaeda and the Taliban, because they were fighting the Soviet Union and Russia. Now, suddenly, because of Joe Biden, who is a sellout to China, and of course Russia, because we have always talked about the Sino-Russian world order, and suddenly we have the Taliban. It's like making friends with their old enemy, and that and we left our bases there in Afghanistan. We sacrificed the life of so many soldiers for what? We left them $1 billion of weapons. I mean it is crazy. It is completely crazy what happened with Joe Biden and pulling out in that way from Afghanistan. To let what? The Chinese take over with the Russians? I mean, it's just completely insane. So
feels like a big setup. It really does.
And at the same time, like I said, we go back into the heart of the problem at the moment with Hamas and what is happening in Israel. And it is, of course, a never-ending crisis, which is just becoming worse and worse. And then we have, of course, on the north of Israel, we have the Hezbollah. But in my book, I also explain how Hamas was created. Because without going further, because we don't have much time, and I'm going to have to leave you in 4 minutes, because, of course, we have always our 90 minutes that are very filled with information, and I don't want to get them too in overdrive, no?
Overloaded, yeah.
Overloaded.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but Hamas is a creation of the Muslim Brotherhood. But at the same time, Hamas' biggest sponsor is in the Emirates, is basically Qatar. And so why is Qatar sponsoring Hamas? Well, simply because Hamas is a relevant way of being present in the geopolitical spectrum. And the Qatar is, of course, the smaller of the Emirates, one of the smaller compared to Saudi Arabia, but they still want to have influence in their context, no? And that's why they also have established Al Jazeera, because Al Jazeera is a way of, but like I write in my book recently, and this is very important, Qatar has financed Newsmax, which is basically a conservative network here in America that is presenting itself as the alternative to Fox News. And these people are actually investing money in it.
Wow.
So that's a little bit, no? Controversial, to say the least. And then at the same time, we have China that basically has become a new player in the region by having a very close relationship with Iran, a very close relationship with of course, with all the various players in the Middle East, that ultimately got them to sanction a new peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia that come from two completely different schools of Islam that will have never, the Western forces, the America and the Great Britain have always played on the divisions like the Knights Templars between the Muslim world. And nowadays, instead, China is bringing them back together and sanctioning an alliance against the West. I mean, so it's just like crazy. Because then Saudi Arabia, when Joe Biden told them, give us more oil, they simply said, screw yourself. We're not going to give you more oil. So it is like really incredible what is happening here because of our ignorance. And I hope that next month we can further illuminate our viewers. And in the meantime, I invite them to, of course, purchase my book.
Is that on Amazon?
Yeah, on Amazon. You can find also the link at leozagami.com. It's the title is Confessions of Illuminati Vol.10, Islamic Freemasonry and the Secret Societies Behind No Conflict.
Zagami.com. Yeah.
LeoZagami.com, of course. And like I said, you just have to put Leo Zagami Volume 10 anyway on Amazon and you get it. And I think that there is no person who has got this book who has regretted. This book can only bring you more closer to the truth and to a major awareness. That means also a possible peace for the future of the world. And we want peace, but to understand, it's not about pragmatically meeting between heads of religion like the Pope does to form his diabolical one-world religion. It's about instead understanding our own differences and also our own sins. Nobody's perfect. That's it. There is nobody here that can claim perfection or ultimately claim ethic and moral superiority. Because in the end, if the Muslims are acting like this, and it's because, unfortunately, there has been also a big influence from the West. If we minded our own business, probably they will have a much better life. And the religion will have not reached this new barbarism with cutthroats, people like ISIS and all that BS. This is the making of the West. And, you know, in 1928, the Muslim Brotherhood was founded. Then we have Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hamas. They're all part of the same poisonous tree. And it's not only of their making, but also of our making.
Right.
Once we all understand that where this evil is coming from, it's coming from all of us. And it's not coming only from one side or the other. And it's really stupid to say, the Zionists is all there, for they're behind everything. Or this, guys, no, it's not so simple. It's not so simple. You're going to get a much better understanding by reading this book. So thank you very much for having me once again on. God bless you all. And I see you next month, Chantelle.
Indeed, Leo. Thank you so much. Always such a pleasure having you on. Lots of incredible information. As you know, I was just sitting, absorbing what you were saying. Definitely will be getting myself your latest book. So, guys, again, if you want to go and check out Leo's book, Confessions of an Illuminati Vol.10, you'll find it on leozagami.com. And obviously that'll take you to the Amazon site where you can get it. Thank you, Leo. Thank you, everybody. God bless you all. Take good care, and I'll see you this weekend.
Bye-bye.